think it's really easy to say Tome Go Burr and say it's an amazing card. I don't think it's as clear cut as something like Codex of Frailty was, and still is. That card's bonkers. Let's first dive into the math to get to the bottom of Tome on whether it's good or not, or at least if it's overrated. Let's start by going into the math behind dragons and how it relates to Tome. So first of all, math of a dragon. Let's assume when we're playing a dragon that we're pitching exactly into it and we're pitching a red. So if we're playing, for example, a 1-cost dragon, we're pitching exactly a red to play it. Net neutral and ash. Let's look at a really baseline dragon of Miragai. You pitch a red, you play the Miragai, it attacks for 2, and it soaks 4 damage. If she's attacked for exactly 4, you got 6 value out of 2 cards, or 3 value over each of your cards. This value can change whether the dragon has an on hit, or an on attack trigger, or it gets popped by Phantasm, or if your opponent just wastes damage attacking it, like maybe they put 5 damage into the Miragai instead of 4. For simplicity's sake, let's assume none of those happen and just go by the base rate of what a dragon does. Now, most dragons, under this assumption math, they're going to be about 3 to 4.5 value per card to play them. For example, a Yenderai can be worth a bit more because it comes in with that shield, and if they attack it for Xaxes, you spent 2 cards, you got 3 attack, and it soaked 6 damage, 9 over 2 cards, 4.5 each. Now, this math completely changes, though, when we pitch a blue to cover our round, and we're able to play multiple things off of that blue. For example, what if we played 3 1-cost dragons off of 1 blue? Usually, you can't do this, though, because your ash economy just can't keep up with this. If you're pitching a blue, you're not generating ash, and then you just end up not being able to play the game anymore. So generally, that's why we don't see this happen too often when we're playing dromi. This is where Tome comes in. Tome, as I like to call it, is a cosplay blue. You play it, you make 2 resources, you make 2 ash, and then you can activate Furnace, going down 1 resource, but then back up 2 more, going to 3 resources. Functionally, it plays as a blue in this spot. And if all it is a blue, that's not like anything game-breaking. You could just play blues in your deck. This is something we always had access to. It's just difficult keeping up with the ash economy when you're pitching blues to cover your round, so that's why we don't typically see that very often. But that being said, being able to play multiple dragons in 1 turn off of a single pitch is very powerful. It goes above rate in those little burst moments, but it also does some other important things. One thing, for example, is deck velocity, and this is something that we've seen for the past couple months now with Lexi. Lexi has incredible deck velocity. If you look at all of her power cards like 3 of a Kind, Codex, Premeditate, Heat Seeker, the list goes on. All of these cards dig deeper into her deck. And then what you end up having in the case of Lexi is her power cards dig you into more power cards and creates this faster churn through her deck where she's able to find these key pieces to just keep going and pumping out this damage. This is the first instance that we're really seeing this natively in the Dromi deck. There's small cases of that, like Tome used to be a card that saw play in Dromi, could come back. Other things like, Snatch and Kyloria, now we're seeing Pursuit of Knowledge. Not quite the same thing as Tome, though, but these effects, once you add enough of them, they start piling onto each other, and you're just able to just speed run through your deck really fast. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, this does open up the ability to have multi-dragon rounds, which is really good, but there's an intangible math behind it that you really can't put a number to. When I was talking about the math behind dragons earlier, this is also under the assumption they die immediately. If they don't die immediately, you get to attack with them again, and the rate of your dragon goes way higher. If they have 3 dragons in play, and they only kill 2 of them, 3rd one lives. Now we're getting even a more above rate on our cards. And that's something else that Tome allows you to do. You're able to just fart out a bunch of dragons in 1 turn, say deal with it, and then your opponent might not be able to deal with everything. Maybe they don't have enough go-agains. Maybe it's in breakpoints that's not easy for them to clean up. There's a lot of different reasons that they could have a difficulty cleaning up everything. And then you get the table dragons, and then that can lead to scary situations where they didn't punch you, so you didn't have to block. So now you have another multi-dragon turn, and it can create a snowball. And that's a power that Dromi has of snowballing that other decks don't really have access to. It's a permanent-based deck, so this is, something that you can do here. And then you just start burying your opponent in advantage from these dragons, and the game runs away from them. It's really hard to put a number on just what that's worth playing a lot of dragons in 1 turn, because it's not clear going into a matchup whether or not they can clear them all or not. But there is a power in doing that, of presenting a bunch of threats in one turn and they can't deal with it. And Tome opens up that ability. And the next real big thing that Tome allows you to do is play your big dragons easier. And that was always a difficulty that we had in the past. Like I mentioned, the blues, a little dicey on actually playing them. You don't want to go ash negative when you're playing your cards. And the other thing that allows you to do is your legendary dragons are actually way more consistent now, because they have the weird restriction on them where it's like, well, you want to pitch a blue to play it because they cost 4, 5, 6. Like, you're just not covering that with reds normally. But they also have the condition of you got to reveal the top card of your deck and get an effect if it's red. And I think the intention originally with them was that you'd pitch them and they'd come back around later. You know your pitch stack because you're a 19 head, and you know that you're revealing reds here. It's not something that you're just trying to like lucker into on first cycle. You can do that, it's just not consistent, because if I want to play these, I want to play blues so I can cast them. If I'm playing blues, it's risky. This is why I didn't like playing Dominia in the past. I know that's something that I've gotten a lot of interesting opinions on, the fact that I didn't play that, but it's not consistent, and I'm not lucky. So this allows you to have access to playing these legendary dragons far more consistently, because you can get away skimping on blues by a ton. You can play like the 3 tomes and just wait to draw a tome, set it, wait for the big dragon to come around. You're like, oh, that's crazy, play the big dragon. Oh, that's crazy, the rest of my deck is reds. It's very easy. And that's another strength too. This is the first real example that we've had of this in the game that I can think of a pitch card you can set. And that's a really weird thing. Think of it this way. You set the tome, you draw a dragon you want to play, and you play the tome from Arsenal, use the resources it made from Arsenal to play the cards in your hand. That breaks a core tenet of the game. We're not normally supposed to be using our Arsenal for pitch. That is a drawback. You know, think back to the Learn to Play. You cannot pitch cards from Arsenal. You cannot block with cards from Arsenal. You can only play cards from Arsenal. This is a core first fundamental of the game, and it's immediately broken with this card. And that's powerful. There's some cons to this card though. Let's get into that now. The first one is you got less armor. That's an obvious one. There is a lot of little subtle things that affects in different matchups. For one, big one that I've noticed, you're so much weaker to Command and Conquer. Obviously, no Crown of Providence, weaker to Command and Conquer. But there's other reasons too. You're playing more non-blocks in your deck with the Tome. You could theoretically cut Sigil from the deck. That's something Mara talked about with me in my video with her, where we talked for a couple hours about the card. But you do have non-blocks in your deck, and you don't have a get out of jail free with your armor, so now you can be in these weird spots where you're like, my hand doesn't block so great. The other thing too is, when you have those kind of hands, you don't really want to block with them anyways, even if you could block. Tome really prices you into not blocking a lot of the time, because you need a big hand for it to function. You know, you want to go, okay, I already have some things that I want to cast here, because you're not trying to just like blindly grab things off the top. You might find something better off of the top, but the way that you're trying to play the game is you're planning with what you already have, and if you get something better, great, we change plans. So I'm going to want to keep the Tome. Ideally, I probably want to keep at least one red, because God forbid I play the Tome with nothing in my hand I wanted to pitch into it, and I hit a blue off of the top. Now my whole plan's out the window. You want the Tome, you want at least one red, and then you probably want like 1 or 2 things to cast off of the Tome. So that's like at a minimum 4 cards right there. Preferably, I would like a 5th card. You know, that'd be nice, because as I mentioned, one of the powers of Tome is the ability to just like create a really big board. Tome plays very good in 5-card hands, letting you do this, and it lets me plan around what I'm doing with the Tome better. When someone comes out with you Command and Conquer, you gotta give them 2 cards. So now we're dropping down to Tome, because we can't block with it, and 2 others. So are we gonna YOLO this Tome? That's kind of dicey. Or are we just pitching it to play our other cards? And maybe the cards that we want to play off of the Tome are our block 3s. So now we're stuck with the cards that we didn't want to block with, but we also wanted to pitch into the Tome. It could be something like defense reactions or something. Basically, Tome just like puts you down weird play patterns where you feel like you just can't block, or you're punished for not being able to block something, and it honestly goes against a lot of what made Dromi good in the past. I'm gonna come back to that thought in a second. And the last like real big weakness that I want to touch on here is you can actually just lose the game on the spot for holding this card if you draw it in late game situation. You can end up drawing into Tome when your opponent's coming in for lethal damage. I can't block with this card. I guess I block with the other 3. Now what do I do with this? This doesn't do anything on its own. This is a piece of a greater puzzle type of card. It doesn't function on its own. Now, yes, you can just play the Tome to give your board go again, but it's not what you're trying to do, and that only matters if you already had a board that's worth pushing. May not be the case. Coming back to the point I had a minute ago that I said I'd come back to. One of the strengths of dromi is your ability to block. Another core tenet of Flesh and Blood. Generally, when you're being a very defensive deck and you're blocking very aggressively, you burn through threat density and it becomes hard to close out games. Dromi doesn't really have this problem as much because every single card in your deck is very good. You don't need much to cross the finish line. A gameplay loop that you'll usually get into as Dromi when you're not playing like an Emperor-style version of the deck is you'll be like, block, 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 set a card, block, 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 play my set, it's a dragon. Oh, my opponent kills my dragon, I'll block, block, keep 2 cards, play different dragon, and we get into this cycle of I start nickel and diming my opponent over the course of the game because I'm slowly building my board while preserving my life total. Sometimes you'll catch them on a hand that just doesn't clear very well or doesn't pressure you very much, and you're just like, oh, I just get to keep everything. Or maybe I choose to take a little bit of damage and just present a board, and then my opponent just kills my board, but I didn't have to block, do it again. And you can kind of get into these loops that punish your opponent for their play patterns because Dromi just operates on a different axis than most decks. That is much harder to do with Tome because it's a non-block, but also it is a card that you don't want to block when you play it. I mentioned that a minute ago. So it's much harder to do that, like block, 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 and slowly build up and nickel and diming your opponent strategy. It's really like the best impression you can do of that is going to be like block, 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 do the thing, and like, do this for a couple turns. Oh, I drew a Tome, no blocks. You can get punished for doing that, though, if your opponent comes in hot that turn, or they have some on-hits that just wreck you, like a Command and Conquer or something. So it's a balance. Now, where Tome can come in for this strategy, though, and cover an inherent weakness that Dromi has with that is generally in Dromi, in this style of deck, you're trying to play defensive cards like Sink Below, Fate Foreseen, etc., etc. When you do what I said a minute ago, if you're like, take some damage, play a big board, and your opponent just goes, okay, clear your board, nothing at you, you can be left holding the bill where you're just like, I really needed to block with this. It's like 3D reacts. Ugh. And you get giga punished for holding a hand like that. Now, where Tome comes in is it can weaponize that defensive hand and turn it into a board state because you're like, okay, well, I have these defense reactions. I'm going to play my Tome, draw my 2, get rid of these D reacts, make some resources, and then play out some board state. So where it adds a weakness, it also covers an old weakness, creating this weird situation where like you can blend these styles together, but it does add risk to the deck. I've rambled long enough on the math, the weaknesses, and the good parts about Tome. Let's just jump into what you guys are probably here for, my opinion on the card. I think Tome is the most powerful card in the deck because of the turns that it opens up to you. I think it's the best Dromi card, but I hate it. This is not the playstyle that I signed up for with Dromi. Honestly, as I say, I'm unlucky. Every time I draw Tome, it just looks like the worst card in the game. I'd rather crack baubles sometimes. I just end up drawing these weird, cursed, clunky hands with it all the time. And, I'm willing to chalk that up to bad luck. I'm used to this shit. It's just not the type of playstyle that I'm looking for in Dromi. I'm very content to play that block, 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 slow nickel and dime and slow burn of my opponent kind of playstyle. That's how I like to play the game. And this does not necessarily facilitate that style. This kind of leans more into the style of gameplay that you'll see aggro decks do, where it's the like no block style and just like ooga booga, play my things. So, I'm torn on the card, and it feels like a necessary evil almost in the deck, where it's one of those like, this isn't what I want to be doing, but the power level is so high where it's offsetting the risk reward of the card, where like it's adding risk to the deck, but the reward is much greater than the risk, so it's worth including. Again, that's not something that I really like. If I wanted that, I would just play an aggro deck, but Dromi I like because it's such a hyper consistent deck. You're just like, oh, my hand doesn't play, I'll block. Oh, my hand does play, I'll play dragons. Like everything functions at all points pretty much. But it's kind of funny though, because back during Uprising, when I first started playing Dromi at Nats 2, I remember after playing the deck for a month or two, I was going, man, the only card I want for this deck right now is, I want like a Read the Runes style card for Ash. I just want something that just like, I can play it and make some Ash. Just, that's all it does. And this is essentially that on steroids. It does that in spades. Like, I was willing to play a card, make 2 to 3 Ash, no go again past turn. I was willing to do that. And when we got the Dust cards, that was like, close to kind of what I wanted, but it wasn't quite what I wanted. So this is just that to the moon. And yet I don't like it. It feels so weird to me that I don't like it. I'm sure I'm in the minority here. I'm sure most people are in love with the card that play it and hate the card when they play against it, and it's something that we're probably going to see a lot of. I am concerned, though, that over the past couple sets, it feels like Dromi has gotten a disproportionate amount of high quality support. Now, as the Dromi player, I'm loving it. Just like, give it to me. I love all these crazy cards I'm getting. It's I don't want to see the deck just suddenly become the best thing and then just instant living legend because it's now the best deck in the format. You know, I want to find a deck, get comfy with it, and play it for a long time. That's how I enjoy the game. I want to sit down and have deck mastery. That was what I was hoping for with Prism. I never expected her to actually living legend. I didn't think she was living legend quality at the time, but F me, I guess. I'll say this, though. One card that came out that I'm not torn on at all is the Chromi Dust. If you're still here for this part, the Chromi Dust is nuts. I think the Chromi Dust might be undebatably good for the deck. Like Tome, I'm torn on. Dust, insane. And what it does for the deck is something that I've wanted, kind of like I was mentioning with all I want is a thing that makes Ash. The Dust does something similar to that, where it's all I wanted for the deck was a way for me to play into the popper matchups like Guardian and just, I don't care who has it, someone has the ability to like fucking win the game. Because it's miserable when you play these long matchups and they can go 50 minutes, 2 hours. The Dromi Oldham games could go so ridiculously long. I just wanted someone to get something that broke the matchup open. So I'm happy that we finally got something. And I'm happy it's on my side of the matchup, obviously, but I just hate how those matchups can just go forever. And if someone's slow at playing the matchup, like, you know, we both got to be like really fast paced. Otherwise, we're going to go to time. So it feels like this is something that, okay, deterministically, someone's winning this game. Doesn't matter. We're not going to time. I do think Bravo and other popper decks could use something to help deal with Dromi, because now it's hitting the point of critical mass of good Dromi cards where it's like, I don't know what the counter is anymore. And honestly, I wouldn't even hate if we saw a ban for Dromi at some point. Like, you know what I hate? I would hate to see it because I love the card, but it almost feels like something like Rake needs to get banned or something, because it's so oppressive to a lot of decks. Like, there's just a slew of decks that just can't beat 3 Ashy Boys. They just can't beat that card. It just gatekeeps like a ton of decks from the format because they can't beat one common in the deck. I don't know. What do you guys think? I would like to hear y'all opinion on the card and the state of Dromi in the game. If you liked this and want some more content, check out my Patreon. I also have a matchup guide on there for how to play every single matchup on Dromi. If you're just here for Dromi stuff, I'm planning on making a guide on how to make matchup guides so I can teach you guys to fish. I'm working on that right now. I'm going to be recording that soon. And if you want to see some more Dromi content, check out the video up here where I do my interview with Mara. We go real deep into our initial thoughts on the card. And if you're looking for cards, check out the link below for my TCG Player. I buy and sell cards, so if you also want to sell anything, hit me up. I buy cards. But that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you.